This is the Impressions Exchange Podcast. Where all topics impacting the graphic imaging and printing industry are addressed via in-depth news coverage, analysis, and timely interviews.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tony McQuilkin, Senior Editor at Printing United Alliance, and I am joined by Paul Bobnak, direct mail guru and expert on all things postal. So we are here for not quite our usual 5-minute mail. This is going to be the extended cut because there is so much going on with the Postal Service that we just need more than 5 minutes to talk about it. So welcome. And let's dive right in because, like I said, there's a lot. On March 26th, David Steiner, who is the current Postmaster General, went before Congress to kind of talk about everything that's going on. And he had a lot of key points and a lot of things that he brought up in that. And I think the first one that was a key takeaway from that is that the Postal Service is kind of in trouble. They are losing money. And according to Steiner, within the next 12 months, they are going to be completely broke, which has a lot of consequences.
Right. And this has been known for a while because a couple months ago, he appeared before MTech, which, is an industry group. And at that point, it was 14 months away from this. So it's been something that's been talked about for a little bit, but this got a lot more public attention.
Yeah. And his immediate, one of the things that he is requesting, and I should make it clear that none of this is in stone yet. This is just what David Steiner was in front of this subcommittee, the proposals that he is requesting in order to move forward. One of the big ones is an increase in the price of stamps that right now, I believe it's 78 cents. I think Correct. He is requesting, is it 95 or 98 cents that he is requesting to bump up the price of a stamp?
Right. And of course, some people have just said, well, why not just make it $1?
And it's still, Steiner, to his credit, he pointed out that of the industrialized world, we have most places in Europe are $2, sometimes $3 for the price of a stamp, and they're going a significantly shorter distance that they are delivering to. So even, his point in the subcommittee that he kept stressing is that even at 98 cents, the price of a stamp would still be less than half of what any other country in the world pays. And it still wouldn't necessarily cover even all of the cost to transport a piece of mail from corner to corner. But it would definitely, in his argument is that it would go a long way toward helping to make up some of those shortfalls. Right.
But obviously they got a lot of public attention talking about that because the public just says, wow, how much for a stamp? And because that's what the public sees. But, in the industry, we know that, that rate is not what major mailers pay for sending out mail.
And I think that's an important point because while the price of a stamp will probably go up, in theory, the actual rate for, the mailing class, the rates that our industry is paying for direct mail would probably also increase. Yes. But there wasn't talk in this committee meeting, at least, as to what that would look like. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting was how much volume of mail has decreased over the years. And that, according to Steiner, that's a big reason why, that everything's in so much trouble, that the cost of everything has gone up with inflation, but the volume of what they're producing, so the income has decreased significantly. And then what they are getting doesn't go as far. So I have two minds of that. On the one hand, it just is people aren't mailing as much. And that's something that we as an industry are constantly fighting against as well as, they're trying to do more with less. On the other hand, with things like the Delivering for America plan, they were actively making mail less attractive. And so, yes, a lot of your bulk mailers were pulling back or walking away. So how much of that volume could come back if the Postal Service stopped trying to be FedEx and started trying to focus on mail again and on serving their mail customers? How many of the brands that we serve as a print industry would return to mailing more because they could trust it again? They could trust that their mail was going to get there on time. They could trust that their rates weren't going to fluctuate wildly every 6 months. I think that's, some of, and none of that was addressed in the hearing, but that was kind of one of my key takeaways is, some of that the Postal Service brought on itself.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I think people knew that even before the Delivering for America plan was really started getting rolled out, is there were warnings about it driving out volume. Because one of the things that also happened was changing the delivery standard, relaxing it, so to speak, so that when a person or even a company with a large campaign mailing it out, it may not get there in the same delivery window that it would have, previously. And that also, that reduces people's confidence in the mail system, both for companies as well as for, individual consumers. They have to plan things differently. And that certainly is something that depresses volume as well. And we also know, of course, that, in the last 20 years since the direct mail volume reached its peak, that one of the reasons why it's obviously has fallen so much is because uh, the internet, right? It's replaced so much of communication. But I always tell people too, it's also a lot of right sizing that's gone on, because I saw this firsthand for so many years, looking at mail every single day, literally going through my hands and seeing so many duplicates and bad addresses and just poor, hygiene and bad practices. But print was cheap, postage was cheap by comparison, so people didn't really look at it too much as a major cost factor. And because pricing, began to get increased for postage and obviously print as well, people really started looking at that and focusing on that factor. So that drove volume out of the system as well.
It did. And, and in some ways it's good for marketing that we've gotten better at personalization. We've gotten better at
Absolutely.
targeting. We've gotten better at creating direct mail pieces that people want to actually open and keep and share and use. And
Mhm.
in conjunction with a great, internet and web and email campaign, direct mail is still so powerful,
Right.
but we're just nailing less of it as a matter of course, because we're producing better mail, but that means we're
Right.
not doing like instead of 100,000 pieces that might be moving through the mail system, there might only be 10,000 and they're more effective pieces. So they're going to be better for the brand. But the Postal Service looking at volume, that's a pretty significant drop.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really like a difficult choice. Like, where do you draw a balance when you're doing that?
Yeah.
Because, you look at some of the other factors that came up, and we can obviously talk about this too, but like, what is it that's driving the cost of the postal service? And obviously, like, the biggest thing is um, labor. Labor is a big part of their cost.
Yeah, I think in that hearing, I want to say 80% of the cost of the Postal Service that Steiner said is labor. And to their credit, he said that they have reduced by like 30 to 35,000 people, I think, over the last few years. So they are
Mhm.
working to reduce, but even Steiner pointed out that there's only so much they can do because their business model with the Postal Service relies on having people to deliver the mail to the addresses. They can't cut
Right.
back on mail carriers because then they can't deliver and then service suffers.
Right. Right.
So they really can only focus on trying to reduce costs on the back end and the warehouses and the sorting and the management, which he
Right.
said they are trying to do. But some of that takes time, attrition, just not
Right.
replacing people, reorganizing. Um, and one of the things that he even, I think, said is that this is not a problem that's going to be fixed by just revenue alone, by just
Right.
cost cutting. Like we can't cost cut our way into fixing the Postal Service. It has to be some systematic changes in how, and Steiner even acknowledged we're not very good right now at managing the network. It is a massive bloated network that has just grown beyond our ability to control. And that's part of the problem.
Right. And other posts have, as you mentioned before, other postal services have had the same issues. Only they are working with countries that are geographically much smaller than the United States, but at the same time, it's the same type of issues, only magnified because there's large distances in the United States. And I mean, I would recommend that people look at one thing, which is the USPS OIG has published white papers on all kinds of things, but one of them is talking about other postal systems and how they are navigating the changes of our age. And there are all kinds of things that they could be doing. U.S. Postal Service could be doing as far as raising revenue and other types of tasks, and that's also been talked about with the Postal Service. One of the ideas is using them to assist the Census Bureau in carrying out the census in 2030. And they're going to do a pilot program in two places in the South, I think in the next couple months or next year to that. And so that's another possibility, that there are, you look at this, the U.S. Postal Service has 33,000 post offices scattered all across the country, which is pretty impressive. It delivers to every single address 6 days a week. There are ways to make that more efficiently used and still maintain some sort of universal service obligation.
Absolutely. And another thing that they brought up, and hammered kind of hard, but again, left it with no necessarily solutions, is, the ship plan, where they were, especially under Louis DeJoy, the previous postmaster, they were really pushing hard to transition into package shipping and kind of away from mail. But mail is what the post office does. That was USPS's purpose. And we have some great companies that do package. You've got FedEx, you've got UPS, you've got companies that, very specifically focus on packaging, and they do it much more efficiently. And so that was
Right.
one of the things that Congress was pointing out, is why are we wasting all of this money trying to become a package company when we've got private sector that's already doing that and doing it well, and you're never going to compete with that. And
Right. It's
one of the things Steiner pointed out is that he did acknowledge that maybe they need to move away from the shipping and kind of refocus on mail. Um, he did say that when they can bring stuff in house and they can have it all under their control. Yes, we all know as business people that if you can insource, then you can control more of it. You can control costs. You can have things be more effective. You can have more efficient workflow. But in a system like the USPS that is this large of a network, I think that was where the problem was, that they thought we can do it better. And as we've seen, I don't necessarily think they can.
right, right. And you look too, I mean, these are um it's competitive industry, right? And they will cut costs to meet their margins. Like, if you're UPS has done that recently. And Postal Service, they can compete by that by being like the lowest, priced option. But again, it's like, what is that really a core part of their mission?
Yeah.
And during especially during the pandemic, when everybody all of a sudden jumped into shipping packages, hey, wow, this is great. But when that volume starts going down, and when the other carriers really start, maximizing and optimizing their own shipping networks, all of a sudden they start to look more attractive to companies that are shipping packages.
Printing United Alliance is the leading member-based printing and graphic arts association in North America, with over 70 years of history and more than 20,000 members worldwide. We're here to support printing professionals like you with the tools, resources, and information you need to grow your business, sharpen your skills, and expand your network. Whether you're a printer, supplier, student, or educator, we've built our community to serve everyone who's passionate about the future of print. An Alliance membership is a smart, cost-effective way to stay current on the latest trends, connect with industry leaders, and give your business the competitive edge it deserves. Head over to printing.org/membership to learn more about the memberships we offer. Let's move the printing industry forward together.
Another thing that was brought up in that hearing was the new vehicles that the Postal Service is committed. I think I want to say it's $10 billion that has been earmarked to upgrade to the new postal delivery vans. And Congress was questioning that. On the one hand, is that the right technology? Is this the right design for a modern a modern postal service? Is it too focused? I've been in the trucks. They are beautiful. They're gorgeous. They're updated. They
Yep.
are also very heavily focused on package delivery over mail.
Right.
So is that the right platform to build the postal service around? On the other hand, we've got to do something because our current mail trucks are 30, 40 years old and
Yeah.
they're starting to get more expensive to maintain. So upgrading our vehicle fleet is absolutely critical, but are we doing it the right way? I think that is something that Congress is taking a really close look at too.
Right. And now, I mean, of course, there's all kinds of considerations over fuel and what is using, what they're using. And when you have, a war going on in the Middle East and concerns about fuel prices, which is obviously going to be a major, again, cost factor in getting mail and packages delivered. When you have them, that are electric powered, not as much of a concern.
Yeah, you've got a lot more flexibility to kind of manage that. And, speaking of fuel, this was not part of the hearing, but has been I think it was last week. The Postal Service has gone to the Postal Regulatory Commission, the PRC,
Mhm.
and has asked for permission to do a temporary 8% increase on, I want to say it is the um, Priority Mail, Priority Express, Ground Advantage,
Mhm.
and Parcel Select. So it's not first class mail, but an
Correct.
8% increase on those four products specifically, temporarily as a fuel surcharge, because
Mhm.
the cost of fuel with everything going on in the world right now has skyrocketed. And
Right.
what little savings they had been managing to claw out, they are now bleeding out again in fuel costs.
Right. Yeah. Just like anybody else, any consumer going to fill up their car or truck, um, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with these skyrocketing costs and the uncertainty about where that's going to go in the next week, the next month, and 6 months from now. And they have to think more long term than we do. So again, a major cost consideration.
And I think that's something, so that fuel surcharge, assuming the PRC approves it, which they are going to meet in the next couple of weeks to review the proposal. If it takes effect, it will be April 26th. So for
Right.
everyone who mails, who spends money on mail, whether it's personal or for a direct mail, you're doing it for your company. Just keep an eye on that. I don't know that the fuel surcharge will necessarily impact direct mail operations all that heavily because we aren't part of that
Right.
class that they're targeting. But it is still something that you might see some fluctuation in the cost of things, especially in the months to come. If this war drags
Mhm.
on, if the cost of fuel continues to go up, it's something to keep an eye on as a mail business. That it might be something you need to kind of plan for or have some flexibility in your estimates and your costs, so that if a surcharge is applied to our rates, our direct mail and bulk mail rates at a later date, you've got some leeway in there built in case of
Mhm.
that.
Right, right. Concurrent with all this going on, the Postcom and the EMA Foundation for Paper-Based Communications, they came out with a study that was done for them by Elevated Insights Group, and let me see if I got the name for it. It's called "The Increased Rate Authority Will Not Solve USPS Financial Challenges," and it's a really interesting study. Lots and lots of details, lots of pages, but basically talking about like, well, uh, at the end of last year, the Postal Service is like looking for increased rate authority, the formula that it
Yeah.
uses to determine postage costs. And basically, there's a lot of conclusions and findings in this, but basically, it's basically saying that if you just have that increased rate authority, it's going to drive more volume out of the system, especially for market dominant mail. So um, first class and marketing mail, and because they make up 94% of all the mail that's handled. Packaging is only like 6%.
Yeah, and
So,
that to me, it seems like there's two opposing forces here, that they want to raise rates in order to make up for the lost volume, but the more they raise rates, the more volume they're going to lose.
right.
And I don't think the Postal Service has figured out where that sweet spot needs to be yet. That has been, I think, the single biggest struggle and why we're seeing all of the challenges.
Right. So there's, there's talking there about like, well, what should be done in this study. So basically it's, trying to find ways of reducing controllable cost. And basically there was a finding that if you, if you reduce the controllable costs by 2% a year, the Postal Service could return to profitability by 2030,
I have
which is
seen
pretty
that.
impressive.
It is. I've seen that. And actually, in the hearing on March 26th, David Steiner specifically addressed that, that the calls that if they could reduce 2%. And he pointed out that that's a lot easier said than done. I mean,
Sure.
it's very easy to say we'll just cut 2%. But as he pointed out, they're a public company in terms of they're not a privately owned, they're not a FedEx, they're not a UPS. Like his example was, if I worked at FedEx and 70% of my routes weren't profitable, I would start cutting routes. If I
Right.
worked at UPS and I was, found that 80% of my stores weren't profitable, weren't bringing in the business, I could just close stores. He said, I
Right.
can't do that with the Postal Service. I can't cut routes. I can't close stores. I can't close locations. So he did point out that while he doesn't disagree with that number, cutting 2%, especially when inflation is rising at a much faster rate, is a lot easier said than done. And I don't envy him because I don't think there's an easy answer. There's not like a magic wand that anyone can wave and say, well, here's all of the excess costs, or here's you're wasting money here. Let's just stop doing this.
Right.
And suddenly all the problems are solved. I don't think there's anything like that.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like years ago, there was, there's always been talk for 40, 50, maybe 250 years, right? About talking about cutting the costs of government. And the Postal Service is part of the government.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, there's no, people always say like talking about ways to do that. Well, cut waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, one person's waste, fraud, and abuse is another person's job or several 100,000 people's jobs. And it's not a line item that you can like look at. So how do you do that? Part of it is the Postal Service. Part of it is on Congress to really take a hard look at this, exercise oversight, which they should be doing, and make it happen.
I was going to say, and it seems like they are. My biggest takeaway from the whole hearing is it wasn't adversarial. I think that Congress on both sides, it's one of the few times when it seems like it actually truly is still bipartisan. Right. It feels very strongly about, keeping the Postal Service alive and keeping it running and finding a true solution. They did again, I want to stress again, no decisions were made. So they did not walk away with yes or no answers. But things like short-term borrowing, that was one of the things that David Steiner, and that they're floating, that right now the Postal Service has borrowed as much as it can. It's legally, it has hit its limit, its cap. So that was one of the things he was asking, is raise that cap and let them borrow money. And he admitted it is a short-term Band-Aid. It is not something that is going to allow them to fix some of these long-term systemic problems, but it will buy them more time. So instead of 12 months of, to insolvency, maybe they get an extra year, maybe they get an extra 2 years. So that just gives him more time to try and find solutions and implement them and get them into place. So that was his argument. Congress was countering that they want to make sure they're not just throwing money away, that they're not just going to keep throwing money at the Postal Service and it just poof vanishes with nothing to show for it. So I think that, as you mentioned, accountability, I think going forward, the intention, and we'll see how it plays out, but the intention is to keep a lot firmer hand on that accountability and where are these dollars going? What are they doing? We're not just giving you money and writing a blank check and just letting it fly away.
Right. I mean, Congress, they have had different periods of involvement in the Postal Service. And the previous one that caused some issues was in 2006, where they basically saddled the Postal Service with prepaying all these employee costs 75 years into the future, which was a drag on the finances. And they did away with that in 2022 with the Postal Reform Act. Yeah. But they also solidified in law the 6-day delivery guarantee, which, is kind of
it's
like,
almost as bad.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, well, you want the reliability of getting into people's homes and businesses 6 days a week. That's terrific, but it may not be realistic in 2026, 27, 28, and beyond to have that, at least, or at least not have like more off days for postal delivery.
I agree. I think that, as much as we would love to say, continue the 6 day a week delivery, I mean, it's what we've all grown up with. It's what it's always been. That is one way that I think that Congress needs to revisit, because yeah, it would suck that you only get mail 5 days a week, but let's be honest, how many of us are paying a lot of attention to our Saturday mail anyway? If you're getting
Right.
marketing mail on a weekend, on a Saturday, you are less likely to pay attention to it because you're living your life. Whereas if you're getting it on a Tuesday, you're actually taking the time to look through your mail, because it's
Right.
just part of that weekly routine. So I think that I could absolutely see the case being made for how it could reduce costs significantly and give them a lot more of that buffer, by
Mhm.
just reducing by the 1 day a week. And it's not going to have significant impact and maybe it will help with those service issues. If they're continuing to run the service sorting and getting things to where they need to be on Saturdays, but they're not delivering. So they're not
Mhm.
paying the mail carriers on Saturdays, but they are paying their team that's sorting and stuff, that maybe that will help relieve some of that pressure on service and delivery that we're starting to see, that they're struggling to keep up. I mean, I've heard, people even in Congress, they brought up like somebody mailed a wedding invitation a month and a half before, and it was still, the wedding was almost on top of it, and they still hadn't
Mm.
actually received their invitations. That's not acceptable. That's not service that the Postal Service builds trust with.
Right.
Um, so if reducing an actual delivery day by 1 day a week, but continuing to have that extra day where they can just focus on nothing but getting mail where it needs to be, that could help relieve some of that pressure as well.
Right. Right. And I think, something else that sort of, occurred to me watching this, and I brought this up, 1,000 times in other places, but people need to really be aware of this. People in the industry, our big print mail ecosystem really need to keep an eye on these things, because it's not just one of those, things where you just sort of shrug and just say, nothing's going to happen. They'll take care of it. It's going to be okay. I'm not so sure about that. I think there's a lot of uncertainties. Uncertainties about a lot of things, but this is certainly one of them. Don't assume that it's going to be. And I would urge people to really look at what the Printing United Alliance and Postcom and Keep US Posted and the Envelope Manufacturers Association. Look what all these groups are doing as far as advocacy on
Absolutely.
Capitol Hill, both before the Postal Service, the administration, Congress. Absolutely keep aware of what's going on and advocate as part of that.
I 100% agree. That was actually one of the points I was going to make, is advocacy is never been more critical than it is right now,
Mhm.
for direct mail in general, with everything going on with the Postal Service, that print and mail operations need to make sure that your voices are being heard, because most of what Congress, even in this hearing, they were talking about individual mail, the things that,
Mhm.
like your wedding invitations, your card for Valentine's Day to your
Right.
loved ones. They're not thinking about marketing mail, because that's not in their wheelhouse. They don't
Right.
understand how it's different. They don't understand how that system works. And so as an industry, we need to educate them. We need to make sure that they're aware what the decisions that they're making will impact the business of mail, not just the mail that they send to their great aunt Martrude, Gertrude,
Right.
or whatever. That is important, but the marketing mail is what's the fuel that drives the system. And if
Yeah.
they cripple that in trying to fix the personal home delivery, then they're working at cross purposes. And so we need to be much better at making our voices heard, and advocacy, talking to your local congress people on the state level, on the federal level,
Mhm. Mhm.
keeping track of what bills and regulations and legislation are up for debate, and reaching out, make a phone call, send an email, send a letter, make sure that people know how you feel and how that will impact your business and your employees and your bottom line, and how that impacts the impact that you make on your economy, because
Right.
that's what congress people listen to.
Yeah, they listen to people who are going to be going to the polls in November
Yeah.
and making decisions. And it's like you said, it's not just all of us in the the printing and mail industries. It's all the people who depend on us. It's the people who are the uh, uh, nonprofits who need to get campaigns in the mail. It's financial institutions. It's the couple that's getting married and wants to make sure that they have enough lead time to put invitations in the mail. They're the ones who really depend on what happens.
Sorry. My cats decided to knock some stuff down. You can cut that out, hopefully. Yeah, I agree that it just is. There's a lot at stake right now. I think that, I've heard talk of privatizing the Postal Service. I absolutely don't think that is the answer. I think we would just see compounding problems and less service and less delivery. I don't think that's the answer. And I think if we want to avoid that as a country, as an industry, as individuals, we have to take the Postal Service more seriously. We can't just, as you said, just assume it'll be fine. Somebody else will fix it. I think we all need to take a bigger stance and have a louder voice as to, what's going to work and what won't.
Right. Yeah. Kicking the can down the road is not going to work.
Exactly.
And I mean, and I look at it like I do a lot of this is that, there are so many possibilities with what we do every day, with the targeting, the personalization, all of the advanced digital printing techniques that really make mail so vibrant and alive and meaningful and relevant. It's all there. We just have to take advantage of it. And we have to make sure that we have a system that supports it. And that's what this is all about.
Awesome. Well, this has been the 5-Minute Mail extended version. If hopefully you have all enjoyed our little bit chance to expand on it and talk about our thoughts a little bit more. We will be back to our regular weekly program, but stay tuned because in the future, when there are topics like this that need a little bit more than 5 minutes, Paul and I will do another extended cut so that you can hear everything that's relevant and why. So join us next week for 5-Minute Mail.